The first time I realized my HOA president, Karen, was capable of genuine sabotage was the morning she stood in my driveway pointing at my roof like it was harboring a nuclear warhead. Her manicured finger jabbed the air, as if she could personally pluck my solar panels off the shingles and toss them in the trash. "They're an eyesore," she announced, loud enough for half the cul-de-sac to hear. "And they don't fit the aesthetic of Maple Ridge Estates." The funny part? Half the neighborhood had been running their coffee makers, air conditioners, and yes, Karen's beloved hot tub, off the very panels she wanted me to remove. Not that she knew it yet. I leaned against my car, coffee mug in hand, and let her rant echo across the perfectly edged lawns. She loved the sound of her own voice. It filled every space like an overzealous fragrance sprayer at a mall kiosk. I didn't bother arguing right away. People like Karen don't want conversations, they want victories. Besides, watching her wobble in 3-inch heels on my sloped driveway was its own small entertainment. When she finally paused for breath, I asked, calm as a monk, "So what exactly do you propose I do, Karen?" "Power my house with a hamster wheel." Her lips tightened into a smile so thin it could cut glass. "Remove them or you'll start accruing fines. The HOA board already discussed it." She tapped her clipboard, the sacred scroll of suburban tyranny. "This is non-negotiable." Now I should explain something here. My panels weren't just about saving money on power or flexing my eco-cred at neighborhood barbecues. I was part of a pilot program with the utility company. My system fed into a shared grid that stabilized power for our entire block. Every time the city's ancient transformers groaned under a summer heatwave, my panels kicked in to buffer the load. Which meant every time Karen microwaved her diet popcorn at midnight or ran her endless string of decorative lawn lights, she had me to thank for not tripping a breaker. But Karen, armed with nothing but self-importance and a hatred of anything modern, wanted them gone. That night I went digging through my paperwork. Permits? Check. City approval? Check. A neat little clause in the HOA bylaws about unsightly exterior alterations? Unfortunately, also check. The board had the power to fine me, though whether they could actually make me remove the panels was murkier. Karen, of course, would interpret the rules as broadly as it suited her. I pictured her sitting in her floral-upholstered throne of a living room, drafting violation notices like a medieval queen handing out executions. By the weekend, it escalated. She called an emergency HOA meeting in the community center, which was really just a converted garage with folding chairs. I showed up because you never skip a war council when your name is on the agenda. She stood at the front like a politician in a bad reality show, pointing at a slideshow of my house. Every photo was angled to make the panels look massive and menacing, as though they were swallowing the roof whole. She used words like blight and eyesore, until one poor guy in the back actually muttered, "They look fine to me," only to receive the full Karen glare, a weapon that has felled stronger men. I waited until she was done and raised my hand. "Just curious," I said, "how many of you lost power during the outage last July?" Nearly every hand went up. "And how many of you still had your AC running?" They glanced around, puzzled. "That's because of my panels. The grid here is patched together with duct tape and prayer, and I've been donating power back every time it sputters." Silence. Karen's jaw clenched. I could almost hear the gears in her head grinding to spin this against me. She did. "Even if that's true," she snapped, "it doesn't change the fact that your house looks like a science experiment. This neighborhood has standards." The board, cowed by her tone, nodded along like obedient bobbleheads. The motion passed. I had 30 days to remove the panels or face escalating fines. She smirked at me as though she'd already won. I walked out of that meeting with my pulse steady and my face blank. Outrage is what Karen fed on. Give her a scene and she'd devour it. I had something better, patience. Because I knew something she didn't. The power company had just upgraded my system. If those panels went offline, the neighborhood wouldn't just lose backup power. They'd lose the stabilizer keeping their ancient lines from blowing out. Karen wanted aesthetics? She was about to get candlelight dinners whether she liked it or not. 2 weeks later, under threat of daily fines, I reluctantly scheduled the removal. Karen practically skipped down my driveway when the crew arrived, waving at neighbors like she'd personally liberated them from tyranny. She even brought lemonade as if this was some kind of block party. I stood by, arms crossed, watching the panels come down one by one. With each panel loaded onto the truck, I could see her satisfaction grow. Her victory tasted sweet to her now. She had no idea the aftertaste was going to be bitter enough to choke on. Because that very night, right after the last truck left, a storm rolled through. The grid sputtered under the strain, and without my panels to buffer the surge, the transformers popped like cheap fireworks. At 9:03 p.m., the entire neighborhood went black. Houses plunged into darkness. Freezers stopped humming. Karen's hot tub, her pride and joy, went cold. And me? My house stayed lit. Because what Karen didn't know was that I'd kept a smaller, secondary array hidden in my garage, just enough to keep my essentials running. I stood at my front window, sipping a fresh cup of coffee brewed from my still humming machine, and watched Karen's silhouette stumble out onto her dark porch. She screamed something about calling the power company. Neighbors spilled into the street, flashlights bobbing, voices rising in confusion. All around me, Maple Ridge Estates was learning a lesson in cause and effect. Karen had fought to strip me of panels she didn't understand, and now she was staring at the consequence in real time. And I wasn't about to explain a single thing. Not yet. That was the night the neighborhood lost power. And it was only the beginning. The morning after the blackout felt like waking up in a ghost town. I brewed another pot of coffee and carried it to my porch, where the only sound was the sputtering of portable generators kicking in one by one. The HOA newsletter, delivered to my inbox at 6 a.m. sharp, like a passive-aggressive alarm clock, already carried the headline, "Neighborhood Power Outage, Working to Resolve." Naturally, Karen signed it at the bottom as if she personally had the grid under control. What it didn't say was that her hot tub had gone stone cold, her freezer thawed overnight, and her decorative string lights drooped in the dark like sad vines. I watched her march from house to house, clipboard in hand, gathering signatures for some petition I hadn't yet been accused of. When she finally got to me, she didn't even bother with a greeting. "Do you know what you've done?" she snapped, as if I'd personally yanked the plug from the transformer. I sipped my coffee. Made coffee during a blackout? Her jaw worked like she was chewing on glass. Half the neighborhood lost food. My tub is ruined. The utility company said something about a stabilizer that was offline. Care to explain? This was the tricky part. Karen wasn't entirely stupid, just drunk on authority. Explaining the truth would give her ammunition. Withholding it would let her spin her own narrative. So I smiled like I had nothing to hide. "I'm not an electrician, Karen. But I'm sure the city will figure it out." She narrowed her eyes, scribbled something on her clipboard, and left without another word. I knew what that meant. War wasn't over. It was just moving to the next battlefield. By noon, the blackout turned into chaos. The HOA Facebook page erupted with posts ranging from "anyone else's fridge dead?" to "this is unacceptable." A few neighbors pointed fingers at the utility company, but others started putting two and two together. One guy, Mike from 3 houses down, commented, "Didn't we always have power during storms before Karen made Opie take down his panels?" That post got 20 likes before Karen deleted it. That night, with the neighborhood still dark, Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting. Again. We sat in the community center, which now smelled of melted candles and sweat. She stood at the front with a battery-powered lantern illuminating her face from below, making her look like a campfire ghost storyteller. "This outage is a direct result of one homeowner refusing to comply with our community standards," she declared, voice ringing with manufactured outrage. I leaned back, arms folded, and let her monologue hang. The board nodded like pigeons pecking for crumbs. She gestured toward me. Our bylaws exist to maintain harmony. When someone decides they're above the rules, we all suffer. This man, she practically spat the word, is responsible for our suffering. The room murmured. Some eyes turned toward me. Others avoided mine, too polite to stare. I cleared my throat. Interesting theory. Except I complied. I removed the panels. You all saw the crew. So if I'm the villain here, I'm a pretty obedient one. That got a few chuckles. Karen's face flushed crimson. Don't be smug. You sabotaged the system somehow. I raised an eyebrow. So let me get this straight. You forced me to remove the very panels keeping your hot tub bubbly, and now that the grid collapsed without them, it's still my fault? That's some Olympic-level logic. The tension snapped. Mike spoke up again. He's right. We had no problems before. Karen, maybe you should have left him alone. Gasped. Karen whipped around, eyes blazing. Excuse me. Excuse you, Mike said flatly. You've been on a power trip for months. It's not about the panels, it's about you needing to control everything. The silence that followed was delicious. Karen sputtered something about order and harmony, but the tide had shifted. For the first time, the board looked uneasy. Their bobblehead nods slowed. When the meeting adjourned, Karen stormed past me, muttering threats under her breath. That's when I decided it was time to stop waiting for fate to punish her. It was time to play offense. The next day, I called the utility company. A very helpful engineer explained that, yes, my panels had been the neighborhood's unofficial safety net. Without them, the system was vulnerable. He sounded almost apologetic. We warned the HOA about this last year, he said. They didn't want to renew the community contract. They said it was unsightly. I nearly laughed out loud. Karen had literally rejected free stability. And now everyone was paying for it. That gave me an idea. A deliciously evil, completely legal idea. The following week, I started talking to neighbors one by one. Over shared extension cords, borrowed ice, and generator fuel, I explained how the panels worked, how they'd kept everyone comfortable, and how Karen's vendetta had put us all in the dark. I kept my tone calm, factual, never gloating. People hate being lectured, but they love uncovering the truth themselves. And oh, did the truth spread fast. By Friday, the HOA Facebook page was on fire again. Posts ranged from, "Why did Karen do this?" to, "Can we overturn the board's decision?" Karen tried deleting and censoring, but like all authoritarians, she underestimated the power of screenshots. The more she tried to silence people, the more they rallied. One evening, Mike knocked on my door with a grin. "We're calling a special election. You in?" I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The next HOA meeting made the last one look tame. This time, the lanterns flickered over angry faces, not at me, but at Karen. She tried to hold the floor, waving bylaws like sacred texts, but the crowd drowned her out with demands for answers. Finally, someone shouted, "Vote her out!" And just like that, the motion carried. Karen's face when she realized her kingdom was crumbling? Priceless. Her smirk twisted into shock, then fury, then something dangerously close to desperation. She stormed out without a word, leaving her clipboard abandoned on the table like a fallen crown. I thought it was over then. I thought stripping her of her little empire would satisfy everyone. But that night, as I stood on my porch under a sky still dark from the outage, I spotted her across the street. She wasn't sulking inside. She was on her phone, pacing, her voice sharp and clipped. Whatever she was planning next, it wasn't retreat. It was retaliation. And that's when I realized, Karen wasn't done. She was just getting started. The night Karen was dethroned should have been a victory lap for me, but it felt more like the calm before a storm. The blackout dragged into its second week, neighbors trudging around with extension cords like soldiers in a war zone, and yet Karen didn't vanish into shame the way most people would. If anything, she got louder. Every morning I'd see her striding up and down the sidewalks, phone pressed to her ear, whispering into it like she was planning a coup. And, knowing her, she was. I wasn't wrong. 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Not from the HOA, not from Karen, but from the city's Department of Building and Safety. It was crisp, official, and accusing. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint claiming my solar installation had been non-compliant with municipal code. The letter demanded an inspection and warned of potential fines. The kicker? The anonymous complainant had included photograph. Guess who had been snapping pictures from across the street in leopard print capris? I sat at my kitchen table, letter in hand, and laughed until my coffee nearly spilled. This wasn't Karen retreating, it was Karen upgrading to a scorched earth policy. She couldn't find me anymore through the HOA, so now she was weaponizing the city. It was petty genius in its own twisted way. The inspection was scheduled for Thursday morning. When the city inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, Karen appeared like a shadow out of nowhere, pretending she was just walking by. She loitered at the curb while the inspector went through my garage, attic, and roof access. Her smile was so wide it looked painful, like she was already imagining me slapped with thousands in fines. But the inspector wasn't buying it. He flipped through my paperwork, checked the permits, and shrugged. Everything here's up to code. Whoever reported you wasted my time. He signed the approval and handed me back the letter. Karen's smile collapsed like a deflating balloon. Wait, she stammered, stepping forward. Are you sure? Maybe you missed something. Those panels are ugly. Doesn't that violate something? The inspector gave her a look that could curdle milk. Ma'am, ugly isn't against code. I almost hugged him. Karen stormed off in silence, but I knew better than to think she was finished. People like her never stop. They just pivot. And pivot she did. 2 nights later, as I was heading to bed, a strange glow flickered through my blinds. At first I thought it was lightning, but when I stepped onto the porch, I saw it. Floodlights. Karen had lined her entire yard with blinding, high-powered floodlamps pointed outward, straight at my house. My living room looked like the surface of the sun. The next morning, bleary-eyed and cranky, I knocked on her door. She opened it with the kind of smug grin that said she'd been waiting for me. Oh, the lights, she cooed. Security measure. With all the outages, I can't be too careful. Shame if they're shining in your windows. Maybe blackout curtains. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I filed a light pollution complaint with the city. It took a week, but the order came down. Lights off by 10 p.m. or she'd face fines herself. The night the enforcement officer knocked on her door to deliver the notice, I toasted with a glass of wine on my porch while she fumed. But her most dangerous move came after that. One afternoon, I got a knock on my door from a man in a suit. Not a city inspector this time, a lawyer. Karen had filed a civil suit against me. The claim? That my reckless removal of solar equipment directly caused the neighborhood outage, which in turn caused her financial losses, spoiled food, damaged appliances, and emotional distress. She actually listed loss of spa enjoyment as a line item for damages. I read the paperwork twice, just to make sure it wasn't satire. It wasn't. She was suing me for her own victory. Now, here's where her plan backfired spectacularly. Because in order to prove damages, she had to prove causation. Which meant dragging in the utility company. And the utility company had receipts, emails, records, contracts, all showing they had warned the HOA, Karen, that removing my panels would destabilize the grid. The engineer I'd spoken to earlier was more than happy to provide testimony. Suddenly her case wasn't just weak, it was self-incriminating. Still, the lawsuit put me in a corner. Legal fees aren't cheap, and Karen knew it. She thought she could drown me in paperwork and bank accounts until I gave up. What she didn't count on was my brother-in-law being a lawyer with a taste for drama. When I showed him the filing, he grinned like Christmas came early. She just handed you a gold-plated counterclaim. Court day arrived in mid-September. The room was stale, fluorescent lit, and packed with curious neighbors who'd clearly treated this as the day's entertainment. Karen strutted in wearing a cream-colored pantsuit, clutching her binder of evidence. I sat with my brother-in-law, calm as ever, letting her bask in the spotlight she craved. The judge listened patiently as she rattled off grievances: spoiled steak, lost sleep, ruined hot tub night. She pointed at me with the same accusatory finger she'd used in my driveway weeks earlier. This man destroyed the stability of our neighborhood. Then my brother-in-law stood. He was surgical. He presented the city permits, the utility contracts, the warnings Karen had ignored. He read aloud the clause in the bylaws she'd twisted, pointing out it said nothing about energy systems. And then he dropped the hammer: a counterclaim for harassment, malicious prosecution, and damages for the fines I'd paid under her unlawful orders. The judge leaned back, eyebrows raised. The neighbors in the back whispered furiously. Karen's face went from smug to pale to a shade of red I didn't know existed. By the end of the hearing, the judge dismissed her suit outright and scheduled a separate date for the counterclaim. Karen stumbled out of the courtroom, shoulders hunched, the weight of her own pettiness finally visible. I should have felt satisfied, but part of me knew it wasn't over. People like Karen don't just lose. They regroup. They dig deeper. That night, as I pulled into my driveway, I spotted her curtains twitch. She was watching me, eyes sharp behind the glass. For the first time, I wondered if this wasn't just about power, or aesthetics, or even control. Maybe for her, this was personal. A vendetta she couldn't let go of. And if I was right, then the darkest chapter of this war was still waiting to be written. I woke up one morning to find my driveway covered in eggs. Not the fun Easter kind, these were raw, splattered, and already baking under the late September sun into a rancid, sticky mess. My first thought wasn't, who did this? But how long before Karen walks by to gloat? I wasn't wrong. By the time I grabbed a bucket and hose, she appeared at the edge of the sidewalk in her neon jogging suit, pretending to stretch. "Oh dear," she said, voice dripping with faux concern. "Looks like someone has enemies." I kept scrubbing, calm as ever. "I wonder who'd hate me enough to risk misdemeanor vandalism," I said, glancing up at her. "Any suspects come to mind?" She smirked and jogged off without answering. At that point, the battle had moved past bylaws and lawsuits into pure psychological warfare. Every day brought a new skirmish. Anonymous complaints about the condition of my lawn. A mysterious order of 10 pizza deliveries I hadn't placed. Flyers slipped under my door advertising garage sale, everything must go, with my address in bold. Petty harassment, designed not to win but to wear me down. Thing is, Karen underestimated me. Where she thrived on noise and drama, I thrived on patience. I wasn't going to match her tantrum for tantrum. I was going to set the stage for her to destroy herself. The first step was information. I filed a public records request with the city for all communications between the HOA and the utility company. It took a couple of weeks, but when the packet arrived, it was gold. There were emails, dated months before the blackout, in which the utility company explicitly warned Karen that dismantling the solar program would destabilize the grid. She'd written back dismissively, "Our community values uniformity over experimental energy gimmicks." She had signed her name to the very disaster she now blamed on me. I made copies, lots of them. The second step was timing. The counterclaim hearing was scheduled for mid-October, and the neighborhood was already buzzing with anticipation. Karen had retreated into her house, curtains drawn, but her reputation bled out with every whisper. The Facebook page, once her fiefdom, now brimmed with memes mocking her hot tub, her clipboard, her obsession with aesthetic standards. Someone even photoshopped her face onto the Wicked Witch of the West with the caption, "I'll get you, and your little panels too." Still, I knew she'd try something before the court date. And I was right. 2 nights before the hearing, I was jolted awake by a loud crash. I rushed outside and found my mailbox flattened, tire tracks cutting across my lawn. I didn't need Sherlock Holmes to guess the culprit. A set of security cameras, installed after the egg incident, caught the whole thing in glorious HD. The footage showed Karen's SUV swerving onto my property at 1:43 a.m., headlights off, then speeding away. I didn't call the cops right away. I waited. Because sometimes the knife twists deeper when you use it at the right moment. Court day arrived like a festival. Neighbors packed into the gallery again, some carrying travel mugs like they'd brought popcorn. Karen strutted in late, hair lacquered into submission, lips pinched. She carried a thick binder of evidence, which I suspected was mostly blank paper meant to look intimidating. The judge opened the hearing, and my brother-in-law wasted no time. He laid out the harassment, the fines, the bogus lawsuit. He presented the utility company's emails, proving Karen had acted against professional advice. Then, with a flourish, he submitted the video footage of her SUV crushing my mailbox. The gallery gasped. Karen's face went white. "Do you deny this is you, Miss Callahan?" the judge asked. Karen stammered, "That could be anyone's car." The judge leaned forward. "It's your license plate." Her binder slipped from her hands, papers fanning across the table. She tried to recover, sputtering about conspiracies, sabotage, neighbors out to get her. But the room wasn't with her anymore. Even the board members who once nodded along like bobbleheads looked away in embarrassment. The ruling was swift. My fines were reimbursed. Karen was ordered to pay damages for harassment plus court costs. The mailbox stunt earned her a stern warning about potential criminal charges if it happened again. Neighbors filed out of the courtroom buzzing, some clapping me on the shoulder, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen stormed out through a side door, refusing to face anyone. I should have felt triumphant. And I did, briefly. But as I drove home, a thought gnawed at me. Karen wasn't wired to accept defeat. Every loss only hardened her. The more public the humiliation, the deeper her obsession grew. And now she had nothing left to lose. That night, as I sat on my porch under the autumn chill, I saw her silhouette in the window across the street. She wasn't pacing this time. She was still, watching. And something about that stillness was more unnerving than all the shouting and clipboard waving combined. The next morning, the neighborhood woke to chaos. The power company trucks were back, parked along the street. Crews climbed poles, examining lines. Apparently, someone had made a series of emergency calls claiming there were electrical hazards caused by my property. The city hadn't believed the caller at first, but after the fifth report, they sent workers to check. One of the linemen knocked on my door. "You got someone out to get you, huh?" he said with a knowing grin. "Don't worry, we'll mark the reports as unfounded. But maybe keep an eye out." As he left, I looked across the street. Karen stood on her porch in her robe, clutching a mug, watching with a smile that was equal parts triumph and malice. I realized then this wasn't about solar panels anymore. It wasn't about power grids or bylaws. Karen had turned this into a personal crusade. Her empire was gone, her reputation shredded, but she couldn't let go of the war. And wars like this don't end with one battle. They end when one side can't fight anymore. The problem was, Karen still had plenty of fight left. What I didn't know yet was just how far she was willing to go, and how much darker the next chapter would become. The first real frost of the season iced the neighborhood lawns the morning Karen finally crossed the line from nuisance to danger. I woke to the sound of pounding on my door, and when I opened it, 2 police officers stood on my porch. Their expressions were serious, almost apologetic. "Sir," one of them said, "we received a report of an illegal power setup operating out of your garage. We need to take a look." I didn't need a crystal ball to know where that report came from. "Sure thing," I said, stepping aside. If Karen wanted a scene, I wasn't going to give it to her. The officers walked through the garage, inspected my backup array, fully permitted, fully legal, and checked the paperwork I kept neatly in a binder. Within minutes, they were satisfied. "Looks in order," the taller one said. "Sorry for the inconvenience. False reports are unfortunately common in disputes like these." I nodded, keeping my tone light. I think I can guess who filed it. They didn't say a word, but their eyes said everything. After they left, I stood in the cold driveway, exhaling frost, staring at Karen's house across the street. Curtains twitched. She was watching, as always. For the first time, I felt something more than irritation. I felt danger. This wasn't just harassment anymore. She was playing with fire, trying to sic law enforcement on me. One more step and she'd land herself in criminal territory. The turning point came 2 weeks later, on Thanksgiving. Most of the neighborhood was buzzing with family visits, cars lining the curbs, kids throwing footballs in the yard. I was basting a turkey when the lights flickered and died. My backup array kicked on instantly, keeping my oven humming, but the rest of the block went dark. Again. Within minutes, people spilled into the street in confusion and anger. And then came the shouting from Karen's house. She stormed out in slippers and a shawl, pointing at me like a conductor leading a chorus. "It's him," she screamed. "His illegal system is draining the grid. He's the reason we can't have power." Neighbors turned to me, some bewildered, some skeptical. I stepped out, calm as ever, turkey baster still in hand like a prop. "Funny theory, Karen. Except my system doesn't drain the grid, it supports it. And if you'd like proof." I motioned toward the utility truck already pulling into the cul-de-sac. Apparently, they'd anticipated issues. The grid had been fragile ever since Karen's interference. The engineer I'd spoken to before hopped out and addressed the crowd. "Folks, the outage isn't because of him. It's because your HOA canceled the stabilizer program. The records are clear. The homeowner across the street," he pointed at Karen's house, "insisted we terminate it." The silence that followed was brutal. Families clutching half-cooked turkeys stared at Karen with open disgust. Kids whined. Elderly neighbors muttered curses under their breath. Karen sputtered, but no one was listening anymore. Her credibility snapped like a brittle twig. That night, my phone buzzed with a dozen messages from neighbors. Some apologized for doubting me. Others asked if I'd consider running for the HOA board now that Karen had been effectively exiled. I wasn't interested in titles, but I saw the opportunity for something better. By Christmas, the board had voted unanimously to reinstate the solar stabilizer program, this time expanding it. Several neighbors even installed their own panels, and the utility company offered discounts to encourage adoption. My house went from target to model. Karen's campaign to purge the neighborhood of ugly panels had birthed a block-wide green revolution. And Karen? She unraveled. She stopped coming to meetings entirely. She lurked in her house, curtains drawn, lights dim. Occasionally, someone would catch her sneaking to her mailbox at odd hours, darting glances like a cornered animal. The HOA Facebook page roasted her daily, memes of her hot tub floating in a dark void or her face photoshopped onto a blackout candle. She tried deleting posts, but she wasn't admin anymore. She had no power, literally or figuratively. I thought maybe, finally, the war was over. I thought she'd retreat into obscurity, licking her wounds. But Karen had one last move. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks cracked in the sky, I stepped outside to breathe the cold air and admire the glow from neighbors' houses, each lit thanks to the reinstated program. Across the street, I saw movement. Karen stumbled out, hair wild, robe flapping, screaming into the night. At first, I thought it was another rant. But then I realized she was shouting at the utility pole at the end of the block. She had a ladder propped against it. I sprinted before she could climb. By the time I reached her, she was clutching a wrench, mumbling about restoring order, and making the neighborhood uniform again. Her eyes were wild, not the calculating glint of the Karen I knew but something unhinged. I called 911. Officers arrived fast, too fast, almost as if they'd been waiting for this. Maybe they had. She fought them, shrieking about panels and aesthetics, but they restrained her and guided her into the cruiser. Neighbors gathered, watching in stunned silence as the self-appointed Queen of Maple Ridge was carted off in handcuffs under the fireworks. In the weeks that followed, life settled. The power grid stabilized. The HOA shifted focus to community events instead of micromanagement. And me? I kept my panels, my permits, and my peace. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd catch myself glancing at the dark windows of Karen's empty house and wonder if she'd ever return. Because people like Karen don't disappear. They wait. They plot. They obsess. But if she does come back, I'll be ready. I've learned her game. And unlike her, I play the long one. For now, though, I sip my coffee in the glow of my solar-powered lights, listening to the hum of refrigerators, heaters and yes, even hot tubs, up and down the block. The neighborhood finally understands who kept them powered all along. And Karen? She finally learned the one lesson she could never accept. When you fight the sun, you always lose.